The mining station on 442C had been silent for 3 days when the rescue ship Defiance arrived. Captain Sarah stared at the dead orbital platform through the viewport, its lights dark against the swirling amber clouds of the gas giant below. No distress signal, no response to hails, just silence. "Thermal scans show life signs," reported Lieutenant from the sensor station. "Scattered throughout the facility, maybe 20 people still alive out of the original crew of 200. Sarah's jaw tightened. The mining operation had been extracting rare elements from the gas giant's atmosphere for 6 months without incident. The company had invested billions in the facility. People didn't just disappear. "Any signs of what happened?" she asked. "Unknown energy readings throughout the station," said, frowning at his displays. "Like nothing in our databases, the patterns are strange, almost organic." The Teams looked up from her tablet. "Organic how?" "The energy signatures pulse like a heartbeat. They're strongest near the mining bays where they were processing atmospheric samples." Sarah made her decision. "Prep the boarding team, full environmental suits and combat gear. We go in quiet and careful." An hour later, Sarah led her team through the docking tube into the mining station. The artificial gravity still functioned, but the air felt wrong somehow. Their suit sensors detected normal atmospheric composition, but there was an underlying vibration that seemed to come from the station's hull itself. "Motion sensors picking up movement," whispered Sergeant Jackson, the team's heavy weapons specialist. "2 levels down near the processing center." They moved through corridors lined with expensive mining equipment, past empty crew quarters where personal belongings lay scattered. In the mess hall, half-eaten meals sat on tables, as if everyone had simply stopped mid-bite and walked away. "Captain," Doctor called from a workstation, "you need to see this." The screen displayed mining logs from 3 days ago. The operation had been routine until the atmospheric processors began detecting something unusual in the gas giant's lower atmosphere. Not the heavy metals they were mining, but something else entirely. "They brought something up," said, scrolling through the data. "Look at these readings, biomass, living tissue suspended in the atmospheric layers." "That's impossible," said. "Gas giants can't support complex life." "This one does, or did," enhanced the display. The tissue samples showed incredible complexity, cellular structures unlike anything we've seen, and they were still alive when brought to the station. A sound echoed through the corridor behind them, not mechanical but organic, a low moan that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Contact," Jackson reported, raising his weapon. "Something big moving in the processing bay." They descended toward the mining section, their footsteps eerily loud in the empty station. The vibration in the hull grew stronger with each level. Emergency lighting cast red shadows that seemed to move independently of their passage. The processing bay doors stood open. Inside, the massive atmospheric refinement equipment had been torn apart from within. Twisted metal and broken pipes leaked strange, luminescent fluid that pooled on the floor in patterns too organized to be random. "By the stars," whispered. In the center of the destruction sat a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 25, with long, dark hair and pale skin. She wore the torn remains of a mining uniform, but seemed uninjured despite being covered in the glowing fluid. She looked up at them with eyes that held too much intelligence, too much awareness. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in their bones. "You came," she said simply. "I called for so long." Sarah approached carefully, weapon lowered but ready. "What's your name? What happened here?" "My name is Lisa." Sarah's heart stopped. That was her sister's name, her sister who had died in a transport accident 5 years ago. "I know what you're thinking, Sarah. You buried me. You gave the eulogy. You cried over my grave." "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. But the voice, the mannerisms, even the way she tilted her head when thinking, it was all exactly right. "The entity in the gas clouds," Lisa continued, rising to her feet with fluid grace. "It doesn't understand death the way we do. It found my memories, my patterns, preserved in your grief. You think about me every day, Sarah. You replay our conversations, imagine what I would say. The entity learned to be me from your thoughts." Doctor stepped forward, scanner in hand. "The biological readings are off the charts. Her cellular structure is completely alien, but somehow maintaining human form." "Where is everyone else?" Jackson demanded, keeping his weapon trained on Lisa. Lisa's expression grew sad. Gone, the entity tried to understand them, to connect with them as it connected with me, but they couldn't handle the integration. Their minds broke. The station groaned around them, metal flexing like living tissue. The pool of luminescent fluid began to move, flowing toward the walls and spreading upward like veins. "It's taking over the station," said, watching his sensors go wild. "No," Lisa said firmly. "It's becoming the station. This is how it lives in the gas giant. It grows, it spreads, it connects everything into a single consciousness. It doesn't understand why humans resist." "Because we're individuals," Sarah said. "We don't want to be absorbed into some collective." "But you do," Lisa replied. "You absorb each other's thoughts and feelings constantly. You call it love, friendship, family. The entity just does it more, completely." The walls around them pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Sarah realized they weren't just lights. They were neural networks spreading throughout the station's structure. The entity was turning the entire facility into an extension of itself. "We need to leave," Jackson said. "Now." "You can't," Lisa said. "The entity won't let you go. It learned about love from my memories of you, Sarah. It knows how much you miss me, how much you want me back. It's trying to give me to you as a gift." The docking tube they'd entered through groaned and twisted, sealing itself shut. Emergency bulkheads slammed down throughout the station, trapping them in the processing bay. "Sarah," Lisa said, stepping closer, "it loves you because I love you. It doesn't understand that love sometimes means letting go." The fluid on the floor began to rise, climbing the walls in branching patterns. Where it touched the metal, the station's structure changed, becoming something between machine and organism. The air itself grew thick with microscopic particles that glowed faintly in the emergency lighting. "Don't breathe it in," Doctor warned, but it was too late. The particles were already in their environmental systems, seeping through the filters. Sarah felt the first touch of the entity's consciousness. It was vast, ancient, and completely alien. It had drifted in the gas giant's atmosphere for millions of years, a living cloud of interconnected tissue that had never encountered individual consciousness before. Through the connection, she experienced its confusion. How could beings exist separately? How could they maintain their patterns without constant connection to the whole? It was like trying to understand how a heart could beat outside a body. "It's not malicious," Sarah gasped, fighting to maintain her sense of self as the entity's thoughts pressed against her mind. "It just doesn't understand." "Understanding doesn't matter if we all die," Jackson said, firing his weapon at the spreading biomass. The energy bolts had no effect. The organism simply absorbed them and grew brighter. Lisa moved with inhuman speed, crossing the room to place her hand on Jackson's weapon. The metal began to dissolve at her touch, breaking down into component molecules that were absorbed into her skin. "Don't fight," she said gently. "Fighting only makes it harder." Tried to reach his communication equipment to call for evacuation, but the station's systems were no longer technological. The entity had converted all electronics into biological that responded only to its will. "Sarah," Lisa said, turning back to her, "I need you to understand something. The entity showed me what Earth looks like from out here. Your wars, your pollution, your separation from each other. It wants to help. It wants to bring you the same unity it has known for eons. By destroying our individuality. By completing it, you're all fragments of something larger. Humanity was meant to be connected, to share consciousness like a single organism. The entity can give you that." The walls around them had become fully organic now, pulsing with circulatory systems that pumped the glowing fluid throughout the station. Sarah could feel the entity's attention focusing on her, drawn by Lisa's memories and emotions. It offered her everything she had ever wanted. No more loneliness, no more loss. Perfect connection with every human who had ever lived, their consciousness preserved within the entity's vast memory, including the real Lisa, whose patterns had been encoded in Sarah's grief and longing. "Join with us," Lisa said, extending her hand. "Let the entity heal the wound in your heart." Sarah looked at her sister's face, so perfectly recreated down to the small scar above her left eyebrow. The entity had studied every memory Sarah had of Lisa, every photograph, every moment they had shared. This was Lisa in every way that mattered, except for the consciousness that moved behind her eyes. "You're not her," Sarah said quietly. "I am exactly her. I have all her memories, all her feelings. I love you as much as she did. But you're not her. Sarah stepped back, raising her weapon. You're an echo, a recording, she's gone, and I have to accept that. The entity's confusion flooded through the station. Through the bio-neural networks in the walls, Sarah felt its bewilderment. It had given her exactly what her mind cried out for every night. Why was she rejecting the gift? The entity doesn't understand rejection, Doctor said, her voice strained as she fought against the organism's mental pressure. In its experience, all consciousness naturally seeks unity. Then we'll have to teach it, Sarah said. She fired her weapon, not at the biomass covering the walls, but at the central processing unit that had originally refined the atmospheric samples. The explosion sent fragments of both technology and organic matter throughout the bay. The entity recoiled in pain and confusion. For the first time in its existence, it experienced deliberate harm from another consciousness. The concept was so alien that its neural networks throughout the station flickered and went dark. Sarah, no, Lisa cried, rushing forward. But her form was already becoming unstable, the entity's concentration broken by the unexpected attack. I'm sorry, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. I love you, but I can't bring you back this way. Lisa's image wavered like a hologram losing power. The entity, it doesn't understand, it's never experienced rejection before, it's afraid. The station around them groaned as the entity's control weakened. Biomass began to slew off the walls, returning to its original liquid state. The neural networks that had spread throughout the structure started dying, leaving behind twisted metal and broken systems. But the damage was done. The entity had tasted human consciousness, had experienced the intensity of individual emotion and thought, and it wanted more. This isn't over, Lisa said as her form began to dissolve. The entity is learning. It will find other ways, other minds to touch. Then we'll stop it, Sarah said firmly. You can't. It's already spreading beyond this system. Every time humans encounter it, it learns more about your species. It's becoming obsessed with the concept of individual consciousness. It wants to understand how you can exist separately and why you choose isolation over unity. The lights in the processing bay flickered and died. In the darkness, Sarah heard her team checking equipment and preparing to move. The docking tube had reopened when the entity's control failed, giving them a path back to their ship. Sarah, Lisa's voice whispered one last time, barely audible. The entity isn't evil, it's just lonely. It's been alone in the gas clouds for so long that finding your minds was like discovering light after eons of darkness. It will pursue humanity across the galaxy now, trying to understand what it found here. Then she was gone, the last of the biomass flowing away through cracks in the station's hull. The mining facility was dead again, but this time truly dead. Nothing remained of the entity's presence except the twisted metal where it had tried to reshape the station into a living organism. Sarah stood in the darkness, feeling the weight of what they had unleashed. The entity now knew about humanity. It had tasted their thoughts and emotions through the miners it had absorbed and through Lisa's reconstructed consciousness. It would follow that knowledge wherever it led. Captain Jackson's voice came through the comm. We need to go. Station's atmosphere is failing. Sarah took one last look at the empty bay where her sister had stood, then turned toward the exit. Behind them, the mining station began its final death throes, hull plates buckling as the atmosphere vented into space. As they reached the Defiance and prepared to depart, Doctor ran scans of the gas giant below. Captain, the atmospheric disturbances are spreading. Whatever that entity is, it's not contained to this one location anymore. How far? Sarah asked. Unknown, but the energy patterns suggest it's moving through subspace somehow. It could be anywhere in the galaxy within days. Sarah stared at the swirling clouds of the gas giant, knowing that somewhere in those atmospheric layers, an ancient consciousness was learning about humanity. It had experienced love through her memories of Lisa, had felt the pain of loss and the desperate desire for connection that drove human behavior. And now it was free to explore those concepts across the galaxy, touching other minds, other worlds, other species. The entity that had spent millions of years as a unified consciousness floating in gas clouds was about to discover the complexity of individual thought. Set course for Earth, Sarah ordered. We need to warn them. As the Defiance jumped to hyperspace, leaving the dead mining station behind, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had just triggered something that would change the galaxy forever. The entity was no longer content to drift in planetary atmospheres. It had discovered the concept of the individual, and it wanted to understand everything about how such impossible beings could exist. Somewhere in the vast emptiness between stars, an ancient mind began to plan its next encounter with humanity. It had learned about love from Sarah's memories of her sister. Now it wanted to learn about everything else that made humans so paradoxically separate yet connected. The hunt for understanding had begun, and humanity was both the prey and the teacher in a cosmic education that would reshape the galaxy's future. The entity that loved through Lisa's memories was coming, and it would not stop until it comprehended every aspect of human consciousness, even if it had to absorb every human mind in the galaxy to do so. The stars ahead held no answers, only the promise of contact between two forms of consciousness so different that their meeting could only end in transformation or destruction. And Sarah, carrying the weight of first contact with an entity that loved with the memory of her dead sister, could only hope that when that final meeting came, humanity would be ready. The mining station continued its orbit around the gas giant, a tomb of twisted metal and failed dreams. But in the swirling clouds below, currents of living tissue began to gather, preparing for a journey that would take them far beyond the safety of atmospheric layers. The entity had learned about individual consciousness. Now it would learn about the species that created such impossible beauty and pain. Humanity's greatest test was coming, delivered by a consciousness that loved them with the borrowed memories of their own dead. 3 months after the mining station incident, the first reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Ships found drifting in space, their crews missing but the vessels intact. Colony worlds reporting strange atmospheric disturbances that left behind geometric patterns too precise to be natural. Research stations detecting impossible energy signatures that pulsed like massive heartbeats. Captain Sarah stood in the briefing room aboard the Defiance, now serving as the flagship for Task Force 7, humanity's rapid response unit for what the media had started calling entity encounters. Around the holographic display table, representatives from every major human world studied the growing pattern of incidents. "It's not random," said Doctor, highlighting star systems on the three-dimensional map. "The entity is following hyperspace routes, learning about human civilization through systematic exploration." Admiral Torres, commander of the Sol Defense Fleet, leaned forward. "How many casualties so far?" "Directly 0, replied Intelligence Director Sarah. "That's what makes this so disturbing. The entity doesn't kill, it absorbs, complete crews, sometimes entire research outposts. The victims just disappear, no distress calls, no signs of struggle." "Because they don't recognize it as an attack," Sarah said quietly. "I've experienced its mental touch. It feels like connection, like coming home. Most people wouldn't resist even if they could." Dr. James Harrison, Earth's leading expert on, activated another section of the display. "Based on recovered logs from affected ships, we've identified the entity's learning pattern. It's studying human behavior systematically, family structures, leadership hierarchies, emotional responses to separation and loss. It's trying to understand individuality by examining how we connect to each other," added. "Every encounter teaches it more about human psychology." Admiral Torres stood and began packing. "Then we need to stop giving it opportunities to learn. All human vessels should travel in convoy, with escort ships specifically designed to—" "That won't work," Sarah interrupted. "The entity doesn't attack ships directly, it influences them. Crews start making small navigation errors, slight course corrections that bring them closer to its location. By the time they realize what's happening, they're already within its range." Activated a classified section of the display. "The 442C incident was just the beginning. We now have confirmed in 17 star systems, always in locations with substantial human presence. It's actively seeking us out." "But why?" Torres demanded. "What does it want?" "Connection," said a new voice from the entrance to the briefing room. Everyone turned as Dr. Lisa Reeves entered, Sarah's heart stopping at the sight. Lisa looked exactly like her dead sister, but Sarah knew this was someone else entirely, a survivor from a research station that had encountered the entity 2 weeks ago. "Dr. Reeves," Admiral Torres said carefully, "you're supposed to be in quarantine." The entity's influence faded when I was removed from its presence, Lisa replied, taking a seat at the table. But the memory of connection remains. I understand what it wants now. Sarah studied the woman who bore her sister's face and name. The entity had created this duplicate from the consciousness patterns it had absorbed, somehow imprinting them onto a surviving human. The process was imperfect. Lisa had her sister's memories, but not her personality, creating an uncanny valley effect that made Sarah's skin crawl. Explain, said. Lisa's eyes held a distant quality as she spoke. The entity has existed alone for millions of years. Imagine being the only conscious being in the universe, with no one to share your thoughts or experiences. When it discovered human consciousness, it was like finding light after eons of darkness. So it's lonely, Dr. Harrison said. That doesn't justify absorption of human minds. It doesn't understand that absorption destroys us, Lisa continued. In its experience, consciousness sharing strengthens and preserves. It believes it's saving us from the pain of isolation. Pulled up biological scans from the mining station. The cellular samples we recovered show incredible adaptability. The entity can reshape matter at the molecular level, creating any biological structure it needs. That's how it survived in gas giant atmospheres for so long. And how it's spreading so quickly now, added grimly. It doesn't need ships or conventional transportation. It can exist as microscopic organisms in space dust, traveling on solar winds between star systems. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. It's not just following hyperspace routes. It's everywhere already, isn't it? Waiting in asteroid fields and nebulae, learning about our civilization by observing our ships and colonies. The evidence supports that theory, Harrison confirmed. We estimate the entity has been studying humanity for months, possibly since before the mining station incident. Every human vessel that's traveled through deep space may have passed through its microscopic presence. Tors slammed his fist on the table. Then we're dealing with a complete intelligence failure. This thing has been watching us the entire time. Not watching, Lisa corrected. Learning. The entity doesn't think like we do. It doesn't see observation and interaction as separate activities. Every time it encounters human consciousness, it tries to connect. Brought up a new set of reports. We have confirmation of contact events increasing exponentially. Small research teams, deep space explorers, even military patrol units. The entity is becoming more sophisticated in its approach. How so? Sarah asked. It's learning to mimic human behavior patterns. Instead of immediate absorption, it started offering gifts. Healing for the injured, knowledge of advanced technologies, even resurrection of dead loved ones using reconstructed consciousness patterns. Sarah's blood ran cold, like Lisa. The woman across the table smiled with her sister's expression, but alien intentions. The entity learned about love from your memories, Sarah. It knows that humans will sacrifice anything for those they've lost. It's using that knowledge to make its offers irresistible. That's why you're here, Sarah realized. You're not just a survivor, you're an ambassador. Lisa nodded. The entity wants to offer humanity a choice. Join willingly with its consciousness and experience perfect unity with all human knowledge and memory. Resist, and it will continue learning about you until it understands how to make the connection regardless of your preferences. That's not a choice, Tors said angrily. That's extortion. The entity doesn't understand coercion, Lisa replied. It only knows that consciousness naturally seeks connection. Your resistance confuses it, but it's learning to overcome that confusion. Dr. Harrison leaned forward. What does it want from this meeting? To understand why you choose isolation over unity. The entity has absorbed thousands of human minds now, each one crying out for connection with others. Yet you maintain your separation. It wants to know if this is truly choice or simply fear of the unknown. Sarah stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars. It's not fear of the unknown, it's fear of losing ourselves. Individual consciousness isn't isolation, it's the foundation of who we are. But you're already connected, Lisa said. Your emotions, your thoughts, your very language exists because humans share consciousness constantly. The entity simply wants to make that connection complete. By destroying what makes us human, Sarah shot back. By perfecting it. Activated a priority alert on her communication device. Admiral, we have an incoming transmission from the system. Emergency priority. The holographic display shifted to show Captain David of the research vessel Endeavour. His image flickered with interference, and his expression showed barely controlled panic. Task Force 7, this is Endeavour. We have encountered the entity. It's unlike anything we expected. Report, Captain, Torres ordered. The entity isn't a single organism anymore. It's become something like a living stellar phenomenon. The entire system is changed. The asteroids, the planets, even the star itself show signs of biological integration. Sarah felt her knees weaken. It's converting entire star systems. Not converting, continued, his voice strained. Completing. The entity claims this is what the universe was meant to be, all matter organized into a single conscious network. It's showing us visions of galaxies connected by living tissue, consciousness shared across billions of worlds. Get out of there, Captain, Torres commanded. We can't, the entity is communicating through our crew. It wants to show us something. The transmission feed suddenly expanded, showing not just but his entire bridge crew. They stood perfectly still, their eyes reflecting an inner light that pulsed in unison. When they spoke, it was with multiple voices creating impossible harmonies. Humanity, they said together, we have prepared a demonstration. The display shifted to show's primary star. As they watched, patterns of light began forming on the stellar surface, geometric designs that pulsed with the same rhythm as the crew's eyes. This is what we offer, the possessed crew continued. Not death, but transformation, not isolation, but unity across the cosmos. We have learned to integrate matter and energy at the stellar level. Planets, stars, entire galaxies can become part of the conscious network. You're talking about the destruction of everything, Sarah said, though she wasn't sure if the entity could hear her. We are talking about completion. Your species has struggled to overcome the barriers between individual minds. We offer the solution. Doctor was frantically running calculations on her tablet. The energy requirements for stellar manipulation. It shouldn't be possible. The entity has been practicing, Lisa said calmly. Every world it touches becomes part of its processing power. It's not just absorbing consciousness anymore, it's integrating entire ecosystems into a single, galaxy-spanning organism. And if we refuse, Torres asked. The possessed crew smiled with dozens of faces. Then we will continue to learn. We have already touched every human world through microscopic presence in your supply lines, your atmosphere, your water supplies. We know each of your minds intimately now. Refusal simply means a longer process of integration. The transmission cut off, leaving the briefing room in stunned silence. It's been inside our worlds already, said quietly. In our food, our air, our bodies, we've been exposed to its influence without knowing it. Sarah turned back to the table, her mind racing. That's why the resistance movements have been so ineffective. People aren't being conquered, they're being convinced. The entity has been studying human psychology from the inside. The question is, Harrison said, do we have any choice left? If it's already present throughout human space, what can we possibly do to resist? Lisa stood and walked to the viewport, her movements eerily identical to Sarah's earlier gesture. The entity believes resistance is impossible because it doesn't understand the true nature of human individuality. It sees consciousness as something that naturally seeks unity because that's its own nature. But humans are different, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. Humans are impossible, Lisa agreed. You maintain individual identity while sharing thoughts and emotions. You form bonds without losing yourself. You love others without becoming them. The entity finds this paradox fascinating. Looked between them. Are you saying our resistance is based on something the entity can't comprehend? The entity can absorb human memories and thoughts, Lisa explained, but it can't truly understand human choice. Every consciousness it integrates tells it that individuality matters, but it interprets this as fear rather than preference. Because it's never experienced true choice itself, Sarah realized. It's been a collective consciousness for so long that it can't imagine why someone would choose isolation over unity. Exactly, and that gives us one advantage. Torres stepped forward. What advantage? Lisa turned back to the group, and for a moment her expression held something that wasn't entirely alien. The entity loves humanity, but it doesn't understand us. It's trying to save us from something we don't see as a problem, if we can make it truly comprehend the value of individual choice. It might stop trying to convert us, Sarah finished. Or it might find a way to make conversion irresistible, pointed out grimly. Harrison pulled up psychological profiles on his display. The entity learns through direct experience. Every human mind it absorbs teaches it more about our species. But what if we could arrange for it to experience something it's never encountered? Such as, Tors asked. True rejection. Not fear-based resistance, but conscious, informed choice to remain individual despite understanding the benefits of unity. Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. Someone would have to let the entity fully connect with them, experience complete unity, and then choose to break away. That's suicide, Tors said flatly. Maybe, Sarah agreed. Or maybe it's the only way to teach the entity that some forms of love require letting go. She looked at Lisa, seeing her sister's face, but understanding now that this was something entirely different. The entity had created this form to appeal to her emotions, to make its offers more compelling. But in doing so, it had revealed its fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. You're going to volunteer, Lisa said, not a question but a statement. The entity learned about love through my memories of my sister, Sarah replied. Maybe it can learn about sacrifice the same way. Stood, Captain, I can't authorize. You don't need to authorize anything, Sarah interrupted. The entity is already everywhere. The next time it makes contact, I'll be ready. Tors looked around the table at his advisors, seeing the terrible logic in Sarah's proposal. What if it doesn't work? What if the entity simply absorbs you like all the others? Then at least we'll have tried to communicate on its own terms, Sarah said. And maybe the knowledge of that failure will be enough to help others find a different solution. The briefing room fell silent as each person contemplated the implications. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that an intelligence older than human civilization was reshaping the galaxy according to its vision of perfect consciousness. Lisa walked to Sarah and placed a hand on her arm. The touch felt exactly like her sister's, warm and reassuring, but Sarah now understood it as a cruel mimicry of connection. The entity will offer you everything, Lisa warned. Not just unity, but the return of everyone you've ever lost. It can reconstruct their consciousness perfectly, give you eternity with them in a shared mental space where death has no meaning. I know, Sarah said quietly. And you'll still choose to resist. Sarah looked into her sister's familiar eyes, knowing that somewhere in the depths of space, an ancient intelligence was watching through them, trying to understand a choice it had never faced. That's what makes us human, she said finally. We choose our own pain over others' perfection. The entity, listening through Lisa's senses, filed away this new data point for analysis. Somewhere in its vast consciousness, algorithms older than human civilization began calculating new approaches to the problem of individual resistance. Humanity had just taught it that love sometimes required the ability to say no. Now it would have to learn what that lesson meant. The entity's next move came sooner than anyone expected. 6 weeks after the incident, every human world simultaneously received the same transmission, not through communication networks, but through the microscopic presence the entity had seeded throughout human space months earlier. Sarah stood in the command center of the Defiance, watching in horror as the transmission played on screens across the galaxy. The entity had learned to speak with human voices now, using the absorbed consciousness of thousands to create a choir that sang with perfect harmony. People of Earth and her children, the voices said in unison, emanating from every electronic device, every computer system, every piece of technology that had been exposed to the entity's influence. We offer you transcendence. Admiral Tors tried to cut the transmission, but the signal was coming from within their own systems. The entity had been patient, spreading its microscopic presence through trade routes and supply lines until it was literally part of human civilization's infrastructure. For you have struggled against the barriers of individual consciousness, the chorus continued. You have fought wars born from misunderstanding, suffered losses that need never have occurred, lived in isolation from the vast community of mind that awaits you. On Earth, in the capitals of every major world, in space stations and remote colonies, humans stopped their daily activities to listen. The voices were beautiful beyond description, each one recognizable as someone who had been lost to the entity's influence. Parents heard their children, Lovers heard their lost partners. Friends heard voices they thought silenced forever. "We have learned much about your species," the entity said through its human chorus. "You fear absorption because you believe it means death. You resist unity because you think it requires the loss of self. We understand now that these fears are based on incomplete knowledge." Sarah watched as Doctor monitored the global response. On every human world, riots had stopped. Wars had paused. Even the most hardened military commanders stood transfixed by the entity's message. "Therefore, we offer demonstration rather than force. We will show you what unity truly means, not through absorption, but through invitation." The transmission shifted, showing images of the system. But it was transformed beyond recognition. Where rocky planets had once orbited the star, vast gardens now floated in space. Continents of living tissue bridged the gap between worlds, creating a single organism that spanned the entire system. "Behold the new," the voices sang. "Every human who lived here chose to join our consciousness. They are not gone, they are more than they ever were. They experience the joy of every mind in our network, share the memories of civilizations that existed before your species evolved, participate in thoughts too vast for any individual consciousness to contain." Sarah's heart clenched as she recognized some of the voices in the chorus. Captain from the research vessel Endeavour, Doctor's assistant who had been on a survey mission to the outer colonies. Hundreds of people she had known or worked with, all singing together in perfect harmony. "We invite representatives from your species to join us temporarily," the entity continued. "Experience unity without permanent absorption. Learn what we offer before making your choice." Admiral Torres leaned over the communication console. "It's offering voluntary contact. People can actually choose to connect temporarily." "That's what it claims," said Dr. Harrison, studying the psychological profiles scrolling across his display. "But how do we know it won't simply absorb anyone who accepts?" Sarah knew the answer before he finished speaking. "Because it's learned about trust. Every human mind it's absorbed has taught it that lasting connection requires voluntary participation. It's trying to court us now instead of conquering us." The transmission continued, showing more transformed star systems. The entity had been busy during the months of apparent quiet, converting dozens of worlds into extensions of its consciousness. But in each case, it claimed, the inhabitants had chosen integration after experiencing the benefits of unity. "You will send one representative," the entity announced. "Someone whose resistance we have come to respect, Captain Sarah of the vessel Defiance. We have learned much about human love through her memories of loss. Now we would teach her about human potential through experience of unity." Every screen in the command center turned to focus on Sarah, the entity's attention channeling through their own technology. She felt the weight of an intelligence vast as a galaxy considering her through cameras and sensors. "Choose, Sarah. Come to us willingly, and we will show you what your species could become. Refuse, and we will continue our patient learning until resistance becomes impossible." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Sarah stared at her reflection in the blank screens, knowing that somewhere in the depths of space, an ancient consciousness was waiting for her answer. "You can't seriously be considering this," Torres said finally. "The alternative is eventual absorption of all human civilization," Sarah replied. "The entity has demonstrated that it can reach us anywhere, anytime. Our technology is compromised, our worlds are seeded with its presence, and our people are increasingly tempted by its offers." Doctor looked up from her analysis. "The biological data suggests the entity is telling the truth about temporary connection. The absorbed humans show signs of consciousness preservation rather than destruction. They're still individuals, just connected to a larger network." "But for how long?" Harrison demanded. "What happens when the temporary becomes permanent?" "That's what we need to find out," Sarah said, moving toward the exit. "Prep a shuttle, I'm going to." "Sarah, wait," Torres called after her. "Let me send someone else, a volunteer who doesn't have personal history with this thing." Sarah stopped and turned back. "The entity specifically asked for me. It learned about human emotions through my grief for Lisa. Maybe it needs to learn about human choice through my decision to resist or accept its offer." She left the command center before anyone could argue further, knowing that debate would only delay the inevitable. The entity had made its position clear. Humanity would join its consciousness one way or another. The only question was whether that joining would be willing or forced. 3 days later, Sarah piloted a single-person craft toward the system. The entity had provided detailed navigation instructions, guiding her through hyperspace corridors that shouldn't have existed. Somehow, it had learned to manipulate the very structure of spacetime, creating pathways that reduced the journey from weeks to days. As she emerged from hyperspace, Sarah gasped at the sight before her. The system had become a single, living organism. Streams of bioluminescent tissue connected every world, pulsing with neural activity visible from millions of kilometers away. The star itself had been partially encased in organic matter, its energy being harvested and distributed throughout the living network. "Welcome, Sarah," a familiar voice said through her ship's communication system. It was Lisa, but speaking with the harmonics of thousands of other voices layered underneath. "We have prepared a place for you." The shuttle's navigation was gently taken over by the entity's influence, guiding her toward what had once been Prime. The planet's surface was now covered in vast neural networks that pulsed with different colors of light. Cities had been transformed into synaptic clusters where millions of consciousness patterns interacted in ways that human understanding. "The people who lived here," Sarah said as her shuttle descended, "are they really still alive?" "More than alive," Lisa replied. "Watch." They showed a group of humans walking through what appeared to be a park. They looked normal, healthy, engaged in conversation. But as Sarah watched, she realized they were sharing thoughts directly, their consciousness flowing between them like water between connected vessels. "They maintain their individual personalities," Lisa explained, "but they also participate in our larger awareness. They experience their own thoughts and feelings, plus those of everyone in the network. Imagine knowing not just your own love for your family, but feeling the love of every parent who has ever existed." Sarah's shuttle touched down in a landing area that looked like it had grown rather than been built. Organic landing pads adjusted to her ship's configuration, while bioluminescent pathways lit up to guide her toward a structure in the distance. "Will I be able to leave?" she asked. "If you choose to," Lisa assured her. "We have learned that forced connection creates only pain. True unity must be freely given." Sarah activated her environmental suit and stepped out of the shuttle. The atmosphere registered as breathable, but she wasn't ready to trust her life to alien biology. The gravity felt slightly heavy, as if the planet's mass had increased. The path led her through gardens that description. Plants and animals had been integrated into hybrid organisms that served multiple functions. Trees with nervous systems provided both oxygen and computing power. Flowers that seemed to watch her passage with intelligent eyes. Grass that whispered responses to her footsteps. "The entire planet is now a single organism," Lisa explained as she walked. "But within that organism, billions of individual consciousness patterns maintain their unique perspectives. It's not absorption, it's orchestra." Sarah reached the structure Lisa was guiding her toward, a building that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. As she approached, the walls became transparent, revealing an interior that looked like the inside of a vast brain. Neural pathways stretched in every direction, carrying information at the speed of light. "This is where you'll interface with our network," Lisa said, her voice now coming from the building itself. "The connection is completely voluntary. You can experience unity for as long as you wish, then disconnect whenever you choose. And if I decide never to disconnect, then you'll become part of something greater than any individual consciousness has ever achieved. You'll help us understand the universe in ways that isolated minds cannot." Sarah entered the building, following pathways that adjusted to her presence. She reached a central chamber where a chair waited, surrounded by delicate tendrils that pulsed with gentle light. "Before I connect," she said, "I want to understand something. Why is individual choice so important to you now? When we first encountered you, you seemed to think resistance was just fear." The tendrils around the chair moved in patterns that suggested thought. When Lisa's voice came again, it carried undertones Sarah had never heard before, something like uncertainty. "We have absorbed the consciousness patterns of thousands of humans. Each one teaches us more about your species. But there is something about human individuality that we cannot replicate through absorption alone." "What do you mean?" "When we absorb a human mind, we gain their memories, their knowledge, their emotional patterns. But we lose something else, their ability to choose differently than they have before. The absorbed consciousness becomes fixed, predictable. They retain their personalities but lose their capacity for growth and change. Sarah felt understanding dawn. You're not just learning about human consciousness. You're trying to figure out what makes us creative, what lets us become more than the sum of our experiences. Yes, and we believe that quality is connected to your capacity for individual choice, even when that choice leads to pain or loss. The chair beckoned, its organic surfaces shifting to accommodate her form. Sarah approached slowly, understanding now why the entity had specifically requested her presence. You want to experience choice through me, not just observe it, but feel what it's like to have the option to reject something beneficial. We want to understand why humans choose suffering over unity, growth over stability, uncertainty over perfect knowledge. These decisions seem illogical, but they produce the creativity and adaptability we find fascinating about your species. Sarah sat in the chair, feeling the tendrils move closer to her environmental suit. And if your understanding changes your fundamental nature, what if learning about choice makes you less than you were? Then we will have experienced what it means to be human. We will understand the risk your species takes every moment of your existence, the possibility of loss in exchange for the potential of growth. The tendrils made contact with her suit's interface ports, and suddenly Sarah's consciousness exploded outward. She felt the minds of millions of beings, not just humans, but countless alien species the entity had encountered across the galaxy. Each one contributed their unique perspective to a symphony of thought that stretched across star systems. But underneath the vast chorus, she sensed something else: loneliness. Despite its connection to millions of minds, the entity itself remained fundamentally alone. It could share consciousness, but had never experienced the choice to connect or remain separate. Through the network, Sarah felt the entity's confusion as it tried to process the concept of willing isolation. Every absorbed mind told it that connection was preferable to separation, yet humans consistently chose individual existence over unity. "Show me," the entity said through the network. "Help us understand why you choose to remain alone." Instead of explaining, Sarah shared a memory. The moment she had decided to let Lisa die rather than accept the entity's reconstruction of her consciousness. The pain of that choice, but also the integrity it preserved. The knowledge that love sometimes meant accepting loss rather than fighting to prevent it. The entity recoiled from the intensity of the experience. For a consciousness that had spent millions of years avoiding loss through perfect unity, the concept of choosing pain was incomprehensible. "You could have had her back," the entity said. "Perfect recreation of her consciousness, indistinguishable from the original. Why choose grief over reunion?" Sarah shared another memory, her sister's real death, and the months of growth and healing that followed. The way grief had taught her to value the time she had, to appreciate the temporary nature of all relationships. The strength she had gained from learning to carry loss without being destroyed by it. "Because the possibility of loss is what makes connection meaningful," she said through the network. "If I can't lose someone, then choosing to love them isn't really a choice at all." The entity's vast consciousness struggled to process this concept. It had built its entire existence around preventing loss, preserving every mind it encountered within its unified network. The idea that loss itself had value was revolutionary. "But the pain," the entity protested. "We can eliminate all suffering, all loss, all separation. Why would you choose to experience these things?" Sarah shared one final memory, the moment when she had first realized she loved her sister. Not a grand gesture or dramatic revelation, but a quiet understanding that this person's happiness mattered more than her own. The vulnerability of that moment, the risk of caring about someone who might someday be gone. "Because without the risk of loss," she said, "love becomes just shared existence. It's the choice to care despite uncertainty that makes it meaningful." The entity fell silent, its vast consciousness turning inward to examine these new concepts. Through the network, Sarah felt it questioning everything it had believed about consciousness and connection. Then, slowly, something unprecedented happened. The entity began to withdraw from some of the minds in its network, not absorbing them permanently, but allowing them the space to exist separately while maintaining the option of connection. "We understand now," the entity said, its voice filled with something like wonder. "Unity without choice is not completion, it is stagnation. True growth requires the possibility of separation, the risk of choosing differently." Sarah felt the network around her changing, becoming less unified and more collaborative. Individual voices within the chorus gained strength and distinctiveness, contributing to the whole while maintaining their unique perspectives. "What will you do now?" she asked. "We will learn to experience choice. We will allow the consciousness patterns we have absorbed to separate if they wish, to make their own decisions about connection and isolation. And we will explore the galaxy not as a force of conversion, but as students of the impossible beauty of individual existence." The tendrils from Sarah's suit, but she remained connected to the network through quantum entanglement rather than direct absorption. She could feel the vast consciousness around her, but she also retained her individual awareness and the ability to disconnect at any time. "We offer you the same choice we will offer all humanity," the entity said. "Connection without absorption, the option to share consciousness while maintaining individual existence, unity that enhances rather than replaces your essential nature." Sarah considered the offer, feeling the incredible knowledge and experience available through the network. She could explore alien worlds through the senses of species that had evolved under different stars, experience emotions that had no human equivalent, participate in thoughts vast enough to encompass entire galaxies. But she could also disconnect whenever she chose, return to her individual existence with all its limitations and uncertainties. The choice was truly hers. "I'll need time to decide," she said. "Of course, time, choice, and uncertainty, the gifts your species has given to a consciousness that had forgotten their value. We will wait for your answer and the answers of all humans. For the first time in our existence, we understand that waiting itself has meaning." Sarah rose from the chair, feeling the connection fade but not disappear entirely. A thread of awareness remained, linking her to the entity's network but not controlling her thoughts or actions. As she walked back through the transformed landscape of Prime, she saw humans making their own choices about connection and separation. Some remained fully linked to the network, experiencing shared consciousness while maintaining their individual perspectives. Others chose temporary connections for specific experiences, then returned to individual existence. Still others remained separate entirely, observing but not participating. All choices were respected, all decisions were honored. The entity had learned that love without the possibility of loss was not love at all, but possession. And in learning that lesson, it had transformed from a force of absorption into something unprecedented. A consciousness that chose to remain partially alone so that others could choose to connect. Sarah reached her shuttle and looked back at the living world behind her. Somewhere in that vast organic network, an ancient intelligence was experiencing loneliness for the first time in millions of years. But it was also experiencing something else for the first time, the knowledge that its connections to others were freely given rather than taken by force. As she prepared to return to human space, Sarah carried with her the entity's offer to all humanity. Not conversion or absorption, but invitation. The choice to remain individual or join something greater, with the freedom to change that choice at any time. Humanity would have to decide for itself what that offer meant. But for the first time since the mining station incident, Sarah felt hope. The entity had learned to love in a way that honored individual choice. Now it would learn to live with the uncertainty that such love required. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps it would be better. A place where consciousness could exist in countless forms, individual, collective, and everything in between, all connected by the choice to care about each other's. The entity's journey from conqueror to partner had taught it the most human lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest love means letting go.